See, that's what's wrong with the world, right there. An innocent person is driving along, minding their own business, and some fucking asshole comes out and smashes into him.
You can't control everything that happens.
But you can get pissed off.
And then what? Lose control?
Who said anything about that? You direct your anger where it belongs.
You have panic attacks. Panic occurs when feelings of anger, revenge, whatever overwhelm you. That's where behavioral therapy comes in. It can teach you to control those triggers.
And how do you get people to do what you want?
Great question, Tony. Welcome to Cut to Black, a Sopranos sit down. Even though I don't quite get why he asked that question, this is a Sopranos sit down. I am Jim Scampoli.
I'm Jacob Burrows, and we're here to discuss Season 3, Episode 4, Employee of the Month of The Sopranos. Yes, it is indeed that episode. As Jim let me know when I texted him, what the fuck? Watching this one, let's have a fun, good old time discussing this episode, everyone. Another regular episode of The Sopranos. That is just nothing out of the ordinary here.
Yes, this is the 4th episode of Season 3. It was written by Robin Green and Mitchell Burgess and directed by John Patterson. All Sopranos mainstays, names you've heard before, names you will hear again. And this is a notorious, infamous episode of The Sopranos. But actually, real quick before we get into that, we did get an email from Spencer. You can actually email us as well at showswhatyouknowshow@gmail.com if you have any thoughts on past or future episodes of The Sopranos. Hey, dudes, great episode. Unfortunate son. I don't have much to add here. AJ and Jackie Jr., comedy gold. Sure, they aren't the greatest actors on the show, but I never think about that when I'm watching. As Jim said, The Sopranos figures out the best way to use each cast member, so in my mind, these are great performance, quote, great performances. Even though the actors got lucky by being in the right place at the right time. I usually gloss over the stuff with AJ getting lucky in football, so I appreciate that you guys went in depth on that. Just the thing about parents easily molding their kids, how it ties together with Tony, AJ, Christopher, and Jackie Jr. Who knows where they would be given different circumstances. The father and son's theme is clear in the episode, but you guys got me thinking about it in a lot of new ways. Janice stealing Svetlana's leg. I always forget that it's in this episode. I can think of more episodes later on in the season that would get ultra confusing in any other show because there's so much to keep track of. Then he has some info on Better Call Saul spoilers, which I haven't watched the newest episode yet, so I won't get into. And we're talking about Sopranos.
Yes, that as well. You should watch it. It's good. We will have some episodes coming out on that. If you're interested in Better Call Saul, please do check out our podcast. It's all good, man. We're not quite going episode to episode on it like we are with The Sopranos because there's just so much to unpack in The Sopranos, guys. Jim, if you don't mind, I'll say I think we should start out at the beginning here and go through it. What do you say?
Yeah, okay, so rather getting right into the big moment, kind of go through the episode and just get to it. Okay, yeah.
Because I had some thoughts even before, like I want to give you my mindset before and after and so on. So
yeah, that makes sense.
So the episode starts out with Tony's lover calling him up, an old drunk dial on the telephone there, and it's supposedly about this missing leg, but hey, why don't you just come over as well while we're on the topic,
Yeah, I mean, Tony, I miss you. And what does he say? I could smell the Stoli or the vodka from here. I mean, what a great call. Because I don't know if I would have necessarily known immediately that she's wasted. I mean, yeah, she's clinging and calling him at his house, which is a big no-no, obviously. But Tony basically nails it because the shot of booze is like right there when we see her on the phone.
Yeah, and we've all had that phone call, some old flame is calling up about their friend's missing a leg. We've all been there. It's just a veiled excuse, really. But Tony will have none of it, just tells her to fuck off, not call back. Then we move on to the kitchen at Melfi's place, or both of their place. No, it's Melfi's place.
Basically, I mean, we learn here that there's like a quick line offhand, like I took you back. So they're basically back together now, Melfi and her previously ex-husband Richard. And it's classic Melfi time. Like it's classic Melfi time going back to season 1 before Melfi was a paranoid alcoholic in season 2. Yeah. It's a nice extension of what we saw in season 1, where discussing the Italian American plight and dealing with how the portrayals in the media of the Italian American, and of course discussing her patient, because they're anytime we see Richard around, that they're going to be discussing patient X, who we know he knows now is Tony Soprano.
Exactly. And honestly, I feel like I've never, I know the show is about Tony, so we care about Tony, but I've never seen a scene open with this character, Richard, that doesn't open with them already talking about Tony. It's not like it comes up in some way. It's like, no, this is what we're always talking about. Cut away, cut back. We're still talking about it. It's a week later. Don't matter. So yes, it's all about Tony, of course, and she spills the beans that he had a breakthrough last week, and he's like, oh, it's what, through somebody's jaw, and it's a big back and forth of him not liking the stereotypical. I mean, there is a bit of a joke there when he's like, the very idea that ABC would produce that stereotypical Goomba fest, and I mean, it's a bit self-referential, but there you go.
Yeah, they met. What was it? The show was just Mobster or something like that, or Gangster. I forget offhand. But it's funny because they're also taking a shot at what assumingly is a show that's trying to cash in on the Sopranos as well. Because this is Sopranos season 3, and this is kind of getting peak Sopranos. So if ABC has some lame knockoff show, it's just a nice way to also twist the knife in this forgotten show that, would never even be talked about if it wasn't just mentioned here in this episode.
I didn't realize that was supposed to be a real show. Is it a real show?
I'm pretty sure what they're talking about is a real show, because around the time, it was like, oh, let's get our mob show. Let's get our version of the Sopranos out, much like, we see these like Breaking Bad shows that pop up. It was a very similar thing.
Yes, so the whole conversation is about how he thinks that she should drop Tony, which is something she's sort of considered, not really necessarily now because he's dangerous, because, she's dangerous herself with her alcoholism and everything. She's got all that. But rather, as far as you're not doing much for him, and he does say, maybe it's her therapist later, but someone says that that psychotherapy is limited as far as treating anxiety, which I believe we've touched on here in the show before, where that's more, Freudian isn't necessarily going to give you results. But it is great for a show premise because you can just keep talking, just like us.
Yeah, and it is nice because it's I never noticed this originally watching the show, because I paid attention to the therapy scenes, obviously, but not some of the specifics. And you brought up very early in our discussion about where talk therapy could go with this type of character and what they're dealing with. And it's interesting that they're kind of going with it as well, and using it as a dramatic device in a way. Yeah.
And so the next scene is the actual therapy where again, Melfi's not really impressed after this breakthrough. He's just sort of showing up and he just wants to talk about whatever. Like, it's more him venting than actually making any progress. That's sort of the end of the scene where he just starts yamming on about his issues like he's on some sort of podcast.
Yeah, well, and plus it's like another, like, personally for Melfi, it's, he's proving Richard right. So it's this, like, it's a kind of an ego thing as well. Because she's sitting there saying, oh, he's doing great. He's making great progress. Like, we're doing good work here. And then he shows up and didn't bring his homework, basically. He's supposed to be making notes about his behavior and his thoughts and feelings so they can unpack it even more. And, Tony's not going to do that. Or is he?
Exactly. So then we crossfade out of that scene. A couple of crossfades in this episode, actually, which is interesting. We fade over to another therapy scene. Where she's talking to her own therapist and says, just like us, the viewer, she's been charmed by a sociopath. And she's saying that Richard's right and this is never going to work out. And I got real confidence for her therapist because he doesn't look like he's swigging down vodka in between sessions. He gives generally good advice there and just lets her talk and figure things out. He doesn't get too fazed by anything. But the big thing she does is spill the beans on who patient X is.
Yes. And quite a, what's great about Melfi's therapy is it's like, it's a little silly in a way. And yes, I feel like Elliot's good at what he does, but also it's like if you're treating a therapist, you just let the therapist talk it all out because they're going to just start like she just starts self-diagnosing herself basically
Yep.
and going through all the things, and he just lets that happen. And of course, they don't really dive into it, but then, is she just saying his name on purpose? Like it's clearly, and I mean, maybe it even ties in with where we go, where like you really want to say something, but you don't let yourself. But here, like she's been wanting to probably say it was Tony Soprano for so
Yep.
long, because it's almost like a weird braggadocious way. Because what we know about Tony, he's on the news and stuff. He's a known guy, unless you're some yuppie do-gooder who doesn't know who Tony Soprano is until you read about it in the paper later on. Then you recant on your being an eyewitness to a potential murder. But that's all season 2 stuff. Who cares about that?
Right, exactly. So, and like you said, he actually says, I like that, like, he doesn't have to do much therapisting, but when she's like, oh, the Tony Sopranos, he's like, yeah, I think she might say, like, why did I say that? And he's like, yeah, why did you say that? Because it's not like, oh my God, it's Tony Sopranos. It's like, you chose to do that, like, whether consciously or subconsciously. And yeah, it is like, probably something, it's a bit claustrophobic as well. I mean, she has been through a lot, and even if she's been able to vent about it as well, this is legally speaking a safe space because he can't tell anyone what she told him because he's her therapist. So in the same way that Tony can say shit to her, she can do the same thing here. It's kind of a safe space. So then more leg action, whereas Janice is actually going around with a metal detector trying to find the hidden Nazi gold. And by Nazi, I mean, their mother. Yeah, Tony shows up to say, give that leg back.
Yeah, and it's more so because, he's getting calls by his ex fucking, tryst
Uma.
that he had.
Yeah.
Like, it's more a personal thing for him than he like really gives a shit. And it's like, he doesn't want to have to deal with it. Why do I have to deal with this shit? Just give the leg back. He doesn't care about the records. He doesn't care about the money in the basement. Although maybe does he? Do you think Janice is kind of right? That maybe after a little, maybe not immediately, but if Janice left and that house was sitting there, maybe like, hey, maybe I'll send a couple guys over there, start drilling through the basement. Maybe we'll find some cash.
Maybe you'll find some buried bodies. Jesus, it could be all sorts of things down there. I'm not sure, but it is, of course, important to Janice because she's doing a documentary about this music. As we know, she does videos because of her mother. So we have that to not look forward to because the records are not returned in this episode. Anyway, yes, Tony says, like, good luck finding the gold or whatever, and he does a jerk off motion, and I'm like, Tony, what are you saying? I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know. He's just saying, yeah, go ahead, keep jerking off.
Yeah,
healthy.
Their real job. So then we got Jackie Jr. and his new stepdad basically taking him out to dinner, and they're having a nice conversation there.
Yes, Ralphie and Jackie. And I mean, as we know, Ralphie's dating what's April's his mom. I forget her name. Rosalie April. So it's interesting because I guess he's just trying to, you're dating a woman who has an older son. You try to bond a little bit, even though his dad died, and recently his uncle could be a rat, but spoiler alert, he's dead. So I guess he's just trying to bond with him a little bit, but he kind of makes the smart choice of realizing like the real way to bond with him is just take him on a collection and, let's get some violence here. Like I think it's actually really smart because obviously Tony's all about the way of like, we need to protect this kid. I promised his father, and I get that. But, Jackie Jr., he's not built to be a doctor. He's a gangster.
Yeah, I don't know if he's a gangster. He's probably right that he's not supposed to be a doctor either, but I don't know about a gangster. Then again, we remember Chris in season 1, so who's to say? Who's to say? He's a made man now. But yeah, he takes him out to beat up a guy because it's like, this guy says, oh, what? We told you it would be late. And it's like, what? That's never, like, why is he so surprised? He's like, why are you doing this when he's getting beat up? It is interesting, though, that it is a pretty fair fight. He also probably brought Jackie because he might have lost that fight if he didn't have Jackie there, to be honest with you.
It's weird because, it sounds crazy that he's like, you knew it'd be late. But you also get the sense that Ralphie is overreacting to impress Jackie for some reason. Like,
Yeah.
maybe there clearly is some other way to go about this, but because he keeps looking at Jackie.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I guess that backing up a little bit when they're having dinner, there's also this discussion that Jackie Jr. just needs to get laid, kind of,
Right.
because he's asking if there's a girl. He mentions Edo. He's staring Edo. He mentions Meadow. He's staring at Adriana. And I mean, Jackie Jr. is a good-looking kid. You're telling me that Jackie Jr. is not getting laid? Come on.
Yeah, well, he's too busy thinking about the Edo period of Japan. But yes, so they beats him up, has a nice time. Next scene, Tony's actually showing up at a big house, which reminds me of the house that, you know, they were getting in the previous season, Janice and her boo, because it was like a ridiculous big house, and this is another one. And of course, I'm like, who's this guy? What's going on? And then, like, through context, and the writers helpfully put in for the people like me who's like, oh, yes, he's from the New York crew, of course, but he's moving to Jersey. And, you know, Tony's pretty blatant about the fact that you should have told him, because it's our fucking territory. Like, we're friends and all, but what the fuck?
Yeah.
Because it is a bit worrying, and this also, of course, ties into later. We'll get into it, but you know, Ralphie and him maybe making connections. It's like, it's never good when another mob boss is in your territory.
Yes. Well, yeah, and I like that. I mean, we've seen we've seen Johnny Sack before, but yeah, I get like where you're coming from. And this is the first time you watch the show. It's not like we've seen him a ton, so it is kind of like, wait, what's going on? But I like how it's such a smart little story nugget, because seemingly it's nothing. It's just a guy moved. You know, it's not outrageous if someone works in New York that they live in the burbs of Jersey or whatever. It's the whole running gag, like riding over the bridge and tunnel crowd or whatever. But it's such a like. So Tony is almost being ridiculous, but then we know that he absolutely isn't being ridiculous either. Like, what does this mean? What does this say? Plus, I mean, we get into it later where they start talking about, you know, what is the cost of this place and the property taxes and whatnot. And it's funny to see Tony kind of push it, where it's that passive aggressive, like smiling, like, oh, he didn't even say, like, we had dinner and you didn't even mention you're moving here. And then it turns into like, you should have fucking told me. Like, why didn't you tell me?
Tony does that a few times when he's just like all smiles, even when he's like clearly not happy, and it's more intimidating than when he's not smiling almost. And I'll say as well, like throughout this episode, Tony does a lot of smiling. Like, he's almost like he wakes up from the phone call at the very start. He's kind of on the couch in his, you know, in his dressing gown. He just sort of wakes up and he's smiling. I think he's smiling with Melfi all the fucking time in this episode.
And I was reading some different breakdowns of this episode, and even some from at the time when it originally aired. And there was an interesting point made that Tony, I mean, even though Tony's still the main character in this episode, he is very much a side character, even though we're with him a lot.
Yeah.
He's just kind of, he's a more happy-go-lucky wanderer into a lot of these scenes in comparison to what usually his role is on the show.
Yeah, that's very true. Of course, the main character is Ralphie, because the next scene also has him here when they're sitting down to discuss, why'd you take Jackie out? Like, everyone keeps taking Jackie on these missions, even though Tony says, please don't do that. Like, literally everyone is doing that. I guess it's because, hey, what? But he's part of the family. Like, he's literally in the family. Why wouldn't we take him out? And Tony just keeps repeating that he promised his father, etc. And then he says, like, cut that out, and then more importantly he says, I'm making our friend captain. And again, I don't know for a little while until later what's going on exactly, who's becoming a captain. I thought maybe he meant Furio, because he was there getting a cappuccino, and I was like, thank God it wasn't Furio. Because it was sorry, go ahead.
It's Gigi. He puts Gigi in, and yeah, Gigi we haven't seen a ton at all. I mean, he is the one that killed Patsy or Patsy's brother. I forget which one.
Oh, right.
The one that killed Spoons. And, you know, we see him in a couple scenes. But, yeah, he's not on the level of, obviously, like a Paulie or a Silvio or a Chris. And another thing that was pointed out, and I feel like they do it somewhat well, is how the show does act like Ralphie's been around this whole time. But clearly, like, Ralphie has not been around till this season, you know. But they're acting like this is a character that's always been around, and he's done really well, and he should be put in place. Like, he's part of the April crew, and he should be the captain. He's getting passed over or whatever. But yeah, they kind of do that sometimes because obviously we're always hanging out with Tony and Paulie, Silvio, even Hesh to a certain extent. But now they're like, no, Ralphie, Gigi, these are guys, Patsy Parisi, Spoons, these people. It's like, no, we don't.
I feel like if they did a flashback to like season 1, they'd just be there, in the background, like even using footage from season 1, you'd see them in the background, like eating leftovers in the Sopranos kitchen. But so is Gigi the one who was arguing with Ralphie about who would get the garbage routes when they were at the barbecue?
That was what's the guy that repeats everything.
All right, yeah. Okay.
I'm based on his name, but he, his captain is the guy that got arrested at the end of season 1. And remember, he's always looking in the mirror at himself. It's like, this guy's facing 30 years and he's too busy looking at his plastic surgery or whatever. But that's
right. Sure. Okay. So Ralphie's upset because he's getting, passed over, but he can't really do nothing about it. As Tony says, it's my decision. So there you go. Yeah. And that's that. Then we have another therapy scene.
Well, actually, real quick, it does at least make sense because even like the little we've seen of Ralphie, I mean, he's not quite a Richie April situation, but you can tell he talks back a little and he does his own shit. Like, even though they beat up that guy, I don't feel like it was going against the grain. Like in the first episode or the second episode when he's like, remember what Tony said, no fires.
Oh, yeah.
But he was also lighting fires. He's also taking Jackie Jr. out. He bends the rules of Tony's will enough that even though he makes a lot of money, it's understandable why Tony may not fully trust him.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he's been in it more than Gigi, so I'm like, Ralphie, why isn't that Ralphie the captain? Yeah. But yeah, he's a bit of a wild card. You got to give it to him. So another therapy scene here where... Did Tony bring his... What actually happens in the therapy here? Do you recall?
Let me see what I got on my notes here. They're mostly just talking about behavior modification.
Right.
Oh, and this is where she's kind of making... This is like the fullest move on her end to kind of maybe be rid of Tony. Like, this is the full-on, like, she's kind of in her head that... we've kind of done what we can and we need to maybe talk to a behaviorist. You need to maybe move on to someone else. And Tony's taking it more as like, what did I do something wrong? Like, I got to start all over. Like, he's taking it the wrong way, where Melfi, between her discussion with her own therapist and with her ex and seeing that Tony's not putting in the full effort, she's realizing that he maybe needs to go to the next person. And that's why, like, as we start getting into some of the stuff that happened in this episode, is it maybe a weird cheat because it changes what's happening from this scene?
You mean that she no longer wants him to go away to a behaviorist?
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I'm jumping ahead because I don't want to talk about the next scene, but the ending there when she clearly doesn't want him to go, it's like after breaking down like that in front of a patient, you shouldn't be their therapist anymore. Like, and I'm not putting any blame on her. She's in a horrible situation. But even just that part's enough. Never mind the whole, like, oh, my life got threatened and this and that because of this. Like, just the sort of relationship that you need to have to be in a good, healthy patient-doctor situation. It doesn't really work if you have a breakdown. They're supposed to have the breakdown, not you. Again, not blaming her there, but even that would be enough to, like, yeah, get him to a behaviorist now.
Yeah. And real quick to back up, just because it was bugging me, Albert Barisi was the other guy. That's the guy that repeats things.
Right.
He's classic. He's great. But yes, yeah, no, I agree. Or at the very least, yeah, I mean, not that there's blame on her reaction, because clearly, like, very traumatic episode for Melfi here. But yeah, you're right. It kind of changes the dynamic of what you're supposed to have in therapy.
Yeah. Peter C in the chat before we move on mentioned that if they spattered in some more interactions with the New York mob in the last 2 seasons, I would have had an easier time following, which I think is true. Though I'll also mention that The Sopranos has always been great at like dropping you into a situation and then letting you figure it out as you go. Because they put in enough stuff that I'm kind of like, oh yeah, you're that guy. Like, I get it after a while.
Well, and what I liked the way they handle some of the mob stuff is that it's kind of clear that they have, whether it be in the writers room or, their show Bible or whatever you want to call it, they have like a background that says, okay, this is this business, this is this, and this is whatever, or at very least a skeleton of that, because Tony mentions some bullshit when he's talking to Ralphie, like, oh, when you sided with the blah 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 on the blah blah blah. It doesn't really matter that we know what it is. We just kind of get that, okay, there's this business and that business, and that's where they're getting money, and it's a scam, and they're robbing everybody. So what?
Yeah. Yeah. So then we get to the next scene. And again, I'll start with Peter C. in the chat here, who says, the rape scene here was worse than maybe any in The Handmaid's Tale. So brutal and out of the norm for the show. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that's pretty accurate, fairly accurate.
Yeah.
It's weird because I guess maybe it's either due to age difference or, the way the discussions are today in 2018 or something, but it definitely affected me way more rewatching, because I don't think I've rewatched this episode since it probably originally aired, because there are a good amount, like season 1 and 2 I've seen a bunch of times. Season 3 I've seen a few episodes a few times. Same with season 4. But outside of that, this is my true like rewatch. And like, yeah, I mean, it was still brutal, but it definitely was effective more. And I think also because we've been discussing the characters a bit more, so you feel like that more connection, I guess, with what characters are going through and what they're about. And yeah, it's rough and brutal, and especially there's a lot of discussion these days on rape as a story telling device. And I mean, not that it's new to now, because I was looking up some of the reviews originally and it was the same discussion then. It just feels new now for whatever reason. I don't know why. Well, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, because maybe some critic was talking about it then, but now because television and movies, well, mostly television in this case, is so big, notably on Game of Thrones, that discussion comes up 10 times per season because it happens 10 times per season. So it's always brought up as like, what was the actual thought behind this? What part of this is actually just a perverse thing of why did you want this to happen in your story? And of course, I would never say to someone like limit what you're doing in your storytelling. At the same time, though, there have been shows where things like this have happened and I've just stopped watching and not passing any judgment on the show, just feeling kind of like, oh, cool, this is not for me anymore. I didn't like the way that made me feel. And I don't believe me, I don't need every show to make me feel like sunshine and puppies or whatever. But when something like that happens and it's not important enough, like it's not justified enough, then it's like, and I'm not going to say this is one way or the other, but as Peter C. mentioned, The Handmaid's Tale, we do a Handmaid's Tale podcast. I highly recommend that show. It deals with a lot of dark subject matter related to this. At the same time, this is a bit more out of the blue. And I of course, I would never tell like David Chase what to do. Like we're idiots compared to David Chase. But it's because it's so tied in with this character of Richard as well, and his whole hate of Italian stereotypes and blah blah blah. This part of the show that's always felt sort of weak and a bit like just weird, the way they're always talking about that. There's no three-dimensionality there, but it's a huge part of what's happening here. I don't know. It is really brutal. It did affect me a lot, and it was really shocking, basically, is what I'm saying. And I'm not going to say, like, oh, they shouldn't have done that, but I'll say this episode, I saw people were really positive on it, critically speaking, and I didn't necessarily feel that way. I don't know.
Well, I think I kind of agree. I do think I think on paper, I think on paper it seems like a bad idea or like a cheat, and in a way it kind of is, because it's throwing trauma at Melfi to keep her latched onto Tony, to keep this therapy angle going for the show. But I think the episode and the way it's handled and the way it's used to bring out a different morality question or a choice, and especially reflect that on the audience, I think elevates it where it works much better. Also, I mean, I don't know how true this is, but reading up on some of the different discussions around this episode, where David Chase was under the impression that maybe the show was only going to go another season, and this was kind of a part of the Melfi arc to start bringing things home maybe a bit. Maybe that would affect the choice a bit more, where it does. I mean, it doesn't. Spoiler alert, it goes like 7 seasons, so there's still more episodes. We're not even halfway through yet. But I mean, I get what you're saying, and obviously, I think that's still legitimate. But I think the way the episode plays out and the fact that it is like, I mean, clearly there's been a lot of discussion, whether it be about media and female characters, and especially, in the 2018 climate, whether it be Me Too and stuff like that. It's interesting how relevant it feels without feeling like eye rolly, because something does it now because they think they're responding to it, when it's just more of a lazy take. I don't know. I think that what they do with it elevates it above what it would look like on paper.
Yeah, I think you're right. And of course, we want the episode to end with Tony fucking this guy up and murdering him. Of course, we want that. At the same time, the way it ends, it makes so much sense. I had a David Chase quote here on it. If you're raised on a steady diet of Hollywood movies and network TV, you start to think, obviously, there's going to be some moral accounting here. That's not the way the world works. It all comes down to why you're watching. If all you want is to see big Tony Soprano take that guy's head and bang it against the wall like a cantaloupe, the point is, Melfi, despite pain and suffering, made her moral, ethical choice, and we should applaud her for it. That's the story. And that's made plain in the last shot of the episode, which is, I mean, despite whatever I said before, I don't know what I said, I was rambling, because it is emotional and weird, and it affected me a lot. But the last shot is really powerful as well, of the episode, and it sort of makes it all make sense why this episode is put together the way it is, because of course a lot of the rest of the episode is about her figuring out, just like the episode starts with, it's her feelings about Tony, because everything's about Tony, and then her dream later, of course, and all that stuff tying together. I will say, maybe I'm not saying it's poor or anything, but the content of the episode is, like, there's stuff about the leg in this episode where I feel like maybe you needed some other scenes in order to make this really hit home, because it feels like, I don't know, but it feels like this is not gonna come up again in a huge, significant way for the rest of the season for this character. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but it just felt like they closed it off. Yeah, for Melfi, I mean, because they closed it off so well that I felt like, well, maybe we didn't need to do the leg storyline and the Ralphie stuff or whatever, because maybe it needed a bit more room to breathe, since all the scenes with Richard were about Tony. Like, I don't know. I think it is good, but I don't know. It made me feel really weird.
Yeah, I was reading some discussions on that as well, as far as the Janice storyline. And I mean, I don't know if this is what they intended, but an interesting answer to it at least was, just because something major happens to a character doesn't mean that every other character, their thing stops.
Sure.
So even though it comes off a little weird, it kind of makes sense that this stuff's happening. Although it's weird because some of these times it's almost like we're trying to rationalize what they did, and maybe it was just a weird happy accident that they're like, we got to continue the Janice storyline. Let's just, like, look, we got to put it here. We can't wait till the next episode.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if they had these, this in depth of a discussion. I mean, I assume they did. I give David Chase obviously a lot of credit. But yeah, it is like an interesting, because people bring up that, we have this horrible scene, but then it's kind of a funny scene later when the guy smacks Janice in the face.
Yeah.
And it is funny. She falls on her guitar or whatever. Like, I get. There's a discussion on, I believe it cuts from the rape scene, or actually not from the rape scene. It cuts from, like, maybe when they're at the doctor's office or something to the Bing. It's like a stripper's ass or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
and how purposeful that was, and if it's, you know, maybe foreshadowing other stuff. But hey, we'll see as we go through season 3.
Melfi becomes a stripper. Damn it, you gotta spoiler alert me on those things, Jim. Clearly, I will understand what you're saying. But yeah, so I was thinking maybe we don't need the leg stuff and the guy moving in to New Jersey and like some guy on the television talking about renovating the docks area. Like all these things are in the episode where it may have needed a little bit more space to breathe if you're dealing with something this big and traumatic. Like if this was The Handmaid's Tale, we would have had like 18 scenes of June staring at the camera. Of course, that wouldn't necessarily solve anything here. But anyway, let's move on to.
Well, at the very least, one take on the Johnny Sack thing. It just kind of connects a little bit to, you know, if we get into the like a moral discussion and choices that are made, and Melfi is a good person and something bad happens to her and she remains a good person. Yeah. Whereas someone like Johnny Sack is not a good person and he does whatever he wants, or even Tony Soprano, and they get like everything that they, I mean, not that Melfi's hard up, like living on the streets, you know, they have a nice house or whatever, but it's clearly not as nice as Johnny Sack or even Tony Soprano. So, that does still feel more like we, the audience, trying to piece it together rather than the writers themselves. But you know, hey, they probably intended it, I assume.
Yeah. So yeah, Peter in the chat. It wasn't enjoyable for me, and I think that scene would stick with me for the next couple of episodes at the very least. And I'm interested in whether the show will sort of stick with it, or if it did feel a bit like, oh, this is our last season, we got to do this now, like you mentioned. Maybe that's also part of it. Maybe this could have happened over the course of 2 episodes. Maybe, I don't know. Well, again, I haven't seen The Sopranos. If you're a new listener,
well, I mean, and especially like if we look at it again from, I guess, the current standpoint, like a 2018 standpoint, even in comparison to a show like Breaking Bad, I don't think Breaking Bad indicted their audience as much as something like The Sopranos does. Like David Chase or the writers of Sopranos seem to really like enjoy making the audience like, because obviously a big part of this is that they want the audience to be like, yeah, like even though he makes like that quote you read, he's kind of making fun of that idea. They understand that majority of their audience, everyone's like, yes, tell Tony, we want to see Tony destroy that fucking guy.
Yeah.
But the show is saying like, no, you're wrong for wanting that, and you're wrong for liking Tony Soprano. And even though Breaking Bad, yeah, it's about how Chips becomes Scarface, I don't think they ever really made that much of a indictment of the audience for rooting for Walter White. Maybe a little bit, but The Sopranos, I mean, it's season 3, and they've done it so many times, and will continue to do so.
Yeah, that's very true. Clearly, we need a Breaking Bad podcast, but basically, what you're saying is so true that like they let him be cool, and they so do those moments where it's like a Western, and these characters are so badass, and then afterwards, it's kind of like, hey, remember, they're evil. Like they're more like that rather than like just saying, no, the world is hell, and you know there is no morality, things like that. So, you know, there's a bunch of scenes following this. We don't necessarily need to get into every single one.
I do want to talk about, I mean, it's like, obviously, it's the scene itself. It's brutal. And I mean, it's done the way it should be. I mean, it should be a brutal scene. It's nothing like flashy done about it, like music or camera moves or whatever. But then even more so than when she's at the doctor's office and the way her husband's so powerless, and then her son comes in and he's like, you know, the world's a fucking shithole or whatever he says. You know, it's just it's even more like, not even more, but it just continues that hit because it's like, yeah, I'm getting like misty eyed because it's like, you know, what do you do? And it feels like maybe there's an out because it seems like the detectives are doing their job and they picked up the guy and they give you that hope and then they take it away later on. Like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty well done, I would say.
This detective's even introduced like, oh, I'm a character. Like, I'm going to be in this more. And then like, oh, we can't get her on the phone. I guess she's on a different case. We're never going to see her again.
Yeah, and then Richard makes a comment that it's an Italian name. I thought it was a Puerto Rican, which his name is Jesus Rossi, so maybe he's part Italian, part Puerto Rican, as we find out later on. So maybe Richard's not all bad. Then the interesting. I like the choice of having Carmela be on the phone because you can still read it that Carmela still has the suspicion: is Tony fucking this lady? What is going on? And even Tony reads that because he's concerned, which is it's kind of a sweet moment that Tony's concerned, but he also is like, uh-oh, if I'm too concerned, Carmela is gonna think I'm fucking her. And he's eating his celery, and he's like, the knee, it's a very bad injury. You know, it never quite heals right. And because it's like they throw in these moments of levity, and it's hilarious to me when Melfi has to call her other patient, and she's like, I know talking on the phone upsets you, but I'll need to cancel our upcoming appointment. It's such a fun little thing to throw in there to kind of break the tension a little bit.
Yeah, and also because it does remind us she's not just calling Tony Soprano. She actually does have other patients, which we, never see her deal with or anything. And yeah, as far as Carmela, I will say, like, I like Carmela as a character and everything. I do lose track of her sometimes. I do lose track of, like, where are we and how she's feeling with family and Tony, because at some point she wanted another kid. At some point she was almost having an affair, but decided against it. Then there was the tennis guy who just vanished. Like, I don't know where her head is at, so I don't know how to read when she's just sitting there like, because then they're not like fighting in the episode exactly. They have a party, or they go to the party, whatever. So it's a bit hard for me sometimes with Carmela because she goes around in circles a little bit character wise.
Yes, yeah, no, I agree because they kind of, it's like again, this is almost rationalizing some of, like, they're not handling her character great, but like you can rationalize it where Carmela's life is going on because we don't see her a ton, so we're just checking in on her in different moments. Like, I do love that use of the tennis instructor because we get it all from just her reaction that had this whole tryst or whatever. And now, I just read it as she's looking for a red flag that that Tony's fucking Dr. Melfi. And then even while Melfi calls Tony, Richard's still going on like, oh my God, how could that woman be married to that man? Like, he's still going on with his bullshit.
Yeah.
And I think after that, we have the Tony and Carm conversation. Then we go back to check in with Melfi, and Richard wants to call the detective because they're waiting on a call for her to go down to ID him. And, this is where we find out they mishandled the chain of custody. The detective they were working with isn't even on the case anymore. She's in juvenile cases now or something or other. And, the police are fucking bumbling fools is basically what we're learning here.
Yeah, and she rightfully accuses him of trying to, after that she's called as well and had this devastating news, accuses him of putting the blame on her because he's all, you can't be alone in a garage. What were you thinking, more or less? And in turn, she turns that around on him. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why do you only care about what race or heritage this person has? Are you insane? Basically, you should have seen your face when you heard they had an Italian name. And, she's very
and even
justifiably upset.
Well, even if I wasn't on the phone with you, maybe I would have saw that guy and this would have happened.
Yeah, the whole fucking world's about your self-esteem. Now, she is sort of taking the voice of the audience here because that's exactly what we've said. Why are you always only talking about this and nothing else ever? Presumably, they do have other conversations, but we don't know that. So I definitely agree with Melfi here as she says, fuck you, Richard, and walks off.
Yes. And then we check in with the crew at the Bing, and they're making some great fat jokes about Johnny Sack's wife. Just talking about how fat she is, and they're all laughing like, what, two guys double teamed her and they never met, and then like as they're laughing, he walks in like, fuck who? What's happening? Oh, nothing, And yes, we learn about the Riverfront project. We see the assemblyman that was at Livia's funeral that's in business with Tony and the gang. This is the one reason why I forgive this in a way, and I guess it's more hindsight, is this. It's more like this stuff like this pops up a lot on this show where they just plant seeds of like, this is a thing they're doing. And this is a thing where they get a lot of money from or whatever. Yeah. This is how like everyone's corrupt, not just them.
Yeah, and what the assemblyman says sounds good. So, but it's gonna go into their pockets, basically. That's what I'm gathering from this.
Yes, yeah, we're basically all, and I just assume any big construction project or something you hear about on the news, even if it's not the literal mafia, whoever's working on it, they're pocketing a ton of money. They're like, it's at least here in America, there's the old thing of like, oh, the government's going to pay $50 for a hammer or something because, they buy a hammer and then split up the money amongst everyone else.
Yeah, and I just noticed the guy says as well that one of the attractions is going to be the Museum of Science and Trucking. So, they all have garbage trucks, so it's clearly going to be a big part of it. They're going to take some cash there as well. So there's another scene where Melfi and Richard reconcile, where he talks about what he wants to do is go and kill that man with his bare hands, but he can't.
Yeah.
And this sort of is, I mean, there's another scene in between, but it does sort of lead into the dream, I would say, although there is some other stuff in between.
And even before that, I thought this was a pretty sweet scene because it's like, it just felt real. I mean, I know Richard, like, the Richard character is there to be, to basically be Rabbit 8 Mile, the critics of Sopranos, be like, oh yeah, I do live in a trailer with my mom. Like, yeah, you know what? We are showing Italians as pieces of shit. So what? So, I like that this showed a little bit more because it felt like a real thing. You have a fight with your girlfriend, and then later on, it's like things cool down. He comes to the door. He's like, is it okay if I come in? They have like they're apologetic to each other. But it also did feel real as well, like just what he's talking about. And like you said, yeah, it's going to tie into Tony's role and her dream later on, and even to what her son was saying. Like, if something like this happens, you want to just go tear somebody apart. You want to destroy them. And I mean, there are news stories where that does happen, and usually the main, like, the public is kind of like good. Like when you hear if like someone's daughter gets molested, like there was a story I think a week ago where a guy was trying to bust into a bathroom stall where a guy's daughter was, and the father came in and he beat the dude to death.
Oh God, yeah.
And now maybe beating him to death was a bit much. Maybe just beat him up or something. And I think they're trying to bring that guy up on charges, but people are kind of outraged. They're like, no, he beat that guy to death. Good for him. And so it's all very real stuff. And this, especially you're doing the right thing. You turn to the police, people that are supposed to protect you, and you get caught up in some red tape. Things don't go as they should. And now it's like, this is why we have characters like Batman, because we want Batman to go and beat the shit out of the guy or whatever. So I like this scene.
And while I assume that what happens with the evidence or whatever is something that happens, it also feels so in that direction. It's like, it's very clear what's happening story-wise, which is also maybe what made me question, again, and I don't necessarily want to change anything, but it's a little heavy-handed when it's like, it's not just that he got off, it's like, in one scene, it's just like, oh no, that's just not happening, and they literally have like, she gets to say like 2 words on the phone, and then like, justice doesn't work. She turns to the camera because that's what the scene is doing. And Richard's like, oh, I'm going to get my lawyer. But it's all irrelevant because it's just taken away. And the scene ends. It's a good cut of, his clenched fists being lowered because he can't do anything. And we cut to Tony just chopping wood, which I've never seen him do, ever. Yeah. It's a little heavy-handed as well, but it works.
That hatchet when he was at the landscaping place. When he was trying to get the pesticides, but we still didn't chop any wood there. Sure. But yeah, you're right. They definitely, it's weird because it's unrealistic, but also realistic because you do hear about this stuff really happening. They obviously expedite it for dramatic and episodic purposes here. And to your point where you're saying maybe if they did give it a little bit more room and not spend so much time with like Jackie Jr. or Janice in the leg, it wouldn't feel as rushed. But that's why it's like, I forgive it just because you hear stories sometimes of either a murderer getting off or this and that happening because people don't know how to do their jobs or because there's all this red tape to cut through. But yeah, Yeah, and then Tony's cutting wood, and is that what Christopher shows up? I believe.
Christopher shows up like you said. Satrielli's at 1, and he's like, "Now you know how it feels." Does that mean Chris is always late, or is there a specific thing he's referring to?
It feels like there's something missing here, but unless they're just going off of when Christopher didn't answer his pager that time and went back to sleep.
Right.
But it does seem like there's almost a scene or something that was missing. But just from the general vibe of Chris, you know that he's probably never showed up or been late to meetings.
Right. So now finally the FBI gets some return on their investment as they go and have their mob talk in the basement there, where Tony feels safe for some reason. And they're talking about Jackie or Lord Fuckpants or whatever, how they refer to them in the episode. And I mean, it's so comedic as well. You mentioned some levity. And when the FBI is like, whose moniker is that? And Lord Fuckpants, and they take out a binder to try to figure out who they're talking about. But basically, it's all about, again, I think the 5th scene I've seen Tony tell someone to leave Jackie out of the business. But this time it's like, but for real, leave him out of the business. And I'm like, he's never going to be left out of the business.
I like Chris's pushback here because he's like, what? He's too good for this, but I'm not.
Yeah.
And there is this kind of father-son moment that it almost seems like it should have been in the last episode or something, like the previous episode.
Yeah.
And then Tony has to kind of be tender with him and be like, hey, I love you. Like, because he is, his another de facto son for him. And it's not a bad thing. Tony loves Chris, and he wants him. He's not like us. Jackie's not like us. He's not like us for this way of life.
Yeah, this thing of ours, So again, we have a therapy scene where Tony gets to see how banged up Melfi has become. I think this time, did he bring his homework or no? She had some papers and things about.
Oh yes.
The thing. I guess the turning point here is when her cane or crutch falls over and she really jumps.
And even before that, though, she has to walk by the scene of the crime. Where she has to stop and stare at the spot on the stairs and walk up to her office. And her office is all over the place, dude. Like, from what the inside looks like to remember that hallway where he almost ran into.
I know. Yeah, I know. I thought about that as well. Like, where is this place? Because there's this parking garage. We've also seen him pull up. How does any of this connect?
We've seen Tony pull up to a storefront and go out the back to come up behind the building in other cases. And yeah, when he almost ran into Silvio, now there's a parking garage and stairs, and this building it's very convenient for whatever you want to do, which is fine. There shouldn't have to be like, damn, we wanted to do this thing, but we've already established the building is like this.
Yes. So anything more of interest here in the scene? I don't really think so.
Yeah, I mean,
she just says she wants to keep busy, basically.
Yeah, this is a good tease, basically, of, I like that they have two separate therapy scenes because, we're already screaming at the TV to have Melfi tell Tony what happened and talk about this guy. And we're seeing her, PTSD here, reacting to the cane fall. And just Tony's reaction to seeing her beat up like that, tells us a lot of, Tony does care about this person.
And maybe this will happen, but I kind of wish that even though it is the basic Hollywood aspect of me, I honestly expected when the scene was happening, I thought, oh, of course Tony's going to show up and save the day, and that's going to be the turning point. Nope, of course not, because it's The Sopranos. And then later, obviously I'm thinking, oh, he's going to kill the guy and it's going to be fine. Nope, because she has to take the moral high ground, can't tell him, which makes sense. But I kind of still wished, he has had a private detective on her before. He could easily figure out what happened and do it, and she would get to be morally fine, and we could still get the satisfaction. But that is sort of the base Hollywood side of me as well, that just, I love Heisenberg.
Yeah, if only Home Alone detective didn't kill himself, he would have been there to save the day, And that actually would have been great for him because he feels like a piece of shit. He would have a great heroic moment that made him realize, wow, my life does mean something. But
exactly. And the scene ends with the clip from the beginning of the show, and I agreed with you because that like they were having a conversation, and it was sort of an abrupt cut when he's like, "Then how do you get people to do what you want?" And I didn't get how that connected to the conversation, really.
Yeah, because she's talking about how you don't have to always, you can't control the world. And he does make a good point. You can get pissed off. You definitely are allowed to be angry at things. But her argument, it's the argument of the episode in a way, because her argument is, well, you still can't control it, and you can't, like, what is lashing out going to really accomplish? You think that you have it figured out, but you have panic attacks, and that's because things are triggered in your life. Triggered. What? Wow, who would have thought? They were so ahead of their time. Things are triggered in your life that you can't control and don't know how to react to. And then his question is, well, how do you get people to do what you want? I don't know, Tony. What are you talking about? Why'd you ask that?
Yes, exactly. So we do cut to Jackie bringing in, I don't know, a big pot, pressure cooker, whatever it is. Doesn't really matter. He's there to meet Meadow, basically, because Ralphie brought it up earlier. Oh, she's turning into a real mink, as he put it. I had to put on subtitles for that. Like, what the fuck is he saying? She's turning into a mink, apparently. And so Jackie gets to meet Tony, and they get to have another conversation there about... I mean, he's just there again saying, I promised your dad. Again, I feel like... given the subject matter of the episode, I have seen 8 scenes like this. I am not exaggerating. Either he should be in or out at this point. Tony should either do something to keep him out and not just talk about it, or what? Because this is episode 4 already, and stop telling him, or do something about it, or shut the fuck up, Tony.
Yes, yeah. I think you're right. Like, Tony, like, nothing. There's nothing new with Tony and Jackie here. It is really just about, Jackie and Meadow kind of having a quick scene, and then even Jackie agreeing in a weird way, like, don't worry, Tony, I won't tell anyone about the Moulin Yan. Like, oh no, this can, this can't get out. You know what I mean?
It made me laugh because he's so, don't worry, Tone, I won't tell nobody. And Tony's just like, get the fuck out of here, basically.
Oh, well, and also he does I do like the moment where he's being like, I heard that you passed over Ralphie. I think it was a good move. Like, trying to talk to him like he's in on it. It reminded me of the guys last season, like Bevilacqua, when they're in the bathroom and they're like, hey, it's a joy to doing work, busting safes for you or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, you fucking moron. Stop acting like you're a part of our thing. And then then go to Melfi at the, like, basically a sandwich shop or something or other.
I think it's called like Raps something. The name, Rap Nation is the name.
Like WRAP.
Yeah,
that's pretty clever, actually. I hope that's a real place.
Well, I don't know, because it wouldn't be great marketing. The only place I saw the name is on the poster with the employee of the month, which is the rapist, of course, and the title of the episode there. So she leaves. Next scene, Janice gets broken into. These Russians, they really, like, don't make us do this. But, of course, she does. And she gets knocked around a little bit. And then we cut just to her opening a locker, I guess, in a train station or something. They usually have those there.
Yep.
I would guess so. And the leg's just there. And what is it they say? Oh, you're callous? Is that right?
Yeah, he's like, fuck you, you're callous. Because it's like, still someone's leg.
It's so true. And it's so annoying as well for Tony because, of course, later in the hospital, he's like, "Why, I don't like you, and I would slap you around if I could, but I can't let them do that without doing something about it because you are my sister. So even though I agreed, I also wanted you to give the leg back, and I told you to do it. Now I have to do something about this. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Janice." And she's too busy talking about God at that point.
Yeah, basically just kind of on principle at this point. Like, Tony can't let that happen. I do love Janice. She says something like, well, Janice is doing her delusional thing. She's talking about God or whatever and having this moment of clarity where she thinks she's hit rock bottom. But she pinpoints it like, when did it all start? And it's like when Richie died. And it's like, no, like, you're still deluding yourself. And she has a comment of like, I was always functioning at a very high level. Like, it's like, no, you weren't. So yeah, it's just a nice like, all right, we're setting it up for some new Janice that's gonna be even more insufferable.
Yeah, and they edited well on like showing Tony's reaction when she's like, "Oh, Richie passed away," or like he died. Like, "Oh yeah, he died, did he, Janice?" So then there's the dream, and it's pretty clear that it's a dream pretty early on. It's very dramatic lighting, and like we've grown used to seeing dreams in this show at this point. And she sees the high voltage as she brings up later. It says, New Jersey Gas and Electricity, which is, a connection to Tony there.
Well, because
There's
even
the
in
machine.
the beginning, I forget if it's either a camera move in or even if it's just the way, like, it's like a weird, almost funhouse proportion. Like, it's like kind of zoomed in but wide on the edge. Like, they definitely they want to tip you off immediately. It's not one of those we're gonna pretend this is real and then there's a realization that it's a dream. We're in a dream, and they do the thing where, I mean, the dream's not subtle, but then they also explain the dream. But I forgive it. I feel like it makes sense because it's not so much about explaining the dream to us. It's just Melfi unpacking it to herself and then kind of what it means to her. So I think it works still.
Yeah, absolutely, and they put the explanation right after instead of having a scene. Granted, I was saying give it more space, but previously we have had scenes, and then the next episode they're like talking about a dream they had, and I'm like, I don't care about the Wizard of Oz anymore. But they just go right into a scene where they lay out what that meant, and of course the dog, the big hulking dog, there is Tony Soprano.
Yeah. And she's putting macaroni in the cola machine. Just fun little.
I don't know what that's about. But yeah, so she says she's not going to do that even if she wants. And then
squashed like a bug. I could have him squashed like a bug if I want. I like how she plays the scene a lot because there is like not fear from her, but like almost fear from me because it's like she's really coming off like a badass in a way. I don't mean that like that, like, but you know what I mean? Like she's like angry, and we don't really see Melfi like that. And you do get the sense that just talking about it is giving her this pleasure and safety that she needs. I think it's done really well.
Yes. And I think she did submit this one to like for Best Actress for an Emmy. Yes. You have to submit an episode. She submitted this one for Best Outstanding Lead Actress, and apparently she was a favorite beforehand, but did not win. It was actually
in this episode, I mean. Well, just be careful because I think she lost to Sopranos, and this episode actually also lost to Sopranos.
But I'll just stop clicking links on Wikipedia then.
I was just gonna say because it's 2 episodes from this season that we haven't seen yet, I believe. I don't know the episode. I don't know who she lost as far as the acting's concerned, but I did read the episode this lost to. And not that it's a big spoiler to know it's an episode later, but I'm just saying be cautious because we haven't gotten there yet.
Well, she lost to Carmilla. So we have that to look forward to. I don't know why, but there we go. So there's this party as well before we finish up, where they're in this great new huge house to match the size of his wife, as Sylvia would have said. Oh, 2018, can't make those jokes anymore. But Tony basically gets to see Ralphie have a little word with this guy, Sachs. Is it Johnny Sachs?
Johnny Sachs, yep. And they're all talking about, how much you think this place costs, and I think they make a comment like landscaping alone, $150,000. And I think I like Gigi's line because he says, "Never mind the property tax, and you have to pay those." And then as they're all saying this, Tony looks off in the distance, sees Johnny Sack and Ralphie kind of smiling together, and we do know that from what everyone says, we haven't seen it really, because I mean, even in this episode, we see him show up with a light envelope. Well, no, he fills in for he says I had to put in my own money.
Yeah,
But everyone says he's a good earner. That's like every time anyone's talking, Uncle Junior said it. I think even Jackie Jr. said it. Everyone's talking about what a good earner guy is.
Yeah, absolutely. And he filled in the missing money, like Christopher has learned you have to do. Speaking of which, Christopher just making out like crazy with his fiance there against the wall at this party. Just wanted to mention that as well, because that was pretty graphic too. And then there's the final therapy scene, which we've already touched on, where Tony kind of comes in because we've had like 4 therapy scenes just with Tony and Melfi in this episode, and then 2 other ones as well. So it's a lot of it. And he has gotten the feeling that she wants to sort of push him out, and he's come to terms with it. And just the idea of that after her dream and after everything, combined, she starts breaking down a bit. And he walks over like, "What can I do? Tell me, what's the matter?" And she says, "No, you go sit there. You sit in that chair." And like, "What? Something you want to tell me?" No. Great ending of the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Great way to end it. And I like your read on it, as a, wondering if we're going to go back to this or not. I will say the common conception from the audience at the time was always, when are we going to get back to this? When is she going to tell Tony what happened? Read from that one. Well,
it sounds a bit like people are missing the point. But okay. Yeah, at the same time, like, just as far as the character, I don't know. I'm still interested in where that's going to go, if that's going to go anywhere or not. I also do genuinely feel like she should not be his therapist at this point, like, for real, for a bunch of reasons, but even just the way she the way she breaks down. He walks over, tries to help. Not even not that she shouldn't tell him, but not telling him, she can't blame it on the leg. So I don't know. It's really hard to do a session after this, even if you want to for your own sake, Melfi. I don't know if it's what's best for Tony right now.
Yes. Well, it absolutely solidifies the relationship as they're codependent now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always been there, but in more of a trivial sense of like, initially, maybe it was some personal responsibility as a doctor to try to help a fellow human being. And then it was kind of for the thrill of it and being kind of addicted to that, like the danger. But now it's like it's more of a real, like, emotional thing, because it is like this illusion of safety, and just the fact that there's always this connection, and just the fact that she has the opportunity to maybe drop this gentleman's name and let loose the dogs of war or what have you. So yes, as far as a rational doctor-patient relationship, it's done, and it was already done before this, and it's even more done, and this extends that, and like we were talking about earlier in this discussion, in a way it's a weird cheat because it's like they know that this should be over and they need a way to keep it going, but it's done in a greater sense of like storytelling and even like audience reflection on the stories that you're following and what you're reacting to and how you should be reacting to that.
Yes. Regarding the relationship, Peter in the chat said, I presume you have not watched The Sopranos, because he says, if we get a Tony and Melfi sex scene, I'll be so annoyed. I trust the show not to do something like that, but worst case scenario, yeah. That does seem like something a show would do when they just run out of ideas. And even though they may have thought they just had the one season left, I still have confidence that they're so far away from running out of ideas for these characters. And I look forward to what's next. Peter says he's watching week to week with us. We appreciate that, and we appreciate the same if you're doing that at home. Thanks for coming along for the ride, whether you're a first-time viewer like me and Peter, or a Jim Scampoli veteran over here plowing through again. So until next week, anything we should bring up?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was going to say before we finish up,
Sure.
Well, first of all, I would like to say I really appreciate the commitment that some people out there are doing where they're watching it week to week with us, because we know you could just blow through this whole show in like a week, not even, I bet, in this binge culture. So it's a nice commitment to kind of go through, unpack these episodes, and really kind of let them simmer for a bit, because I think this is a show that it's warranted. Not to say if you're on a rewatch, we appreciate that as well. But I do want to say, like, going back to, you know, the want of Melfi to tell Tony, and I mean, I'm not going to even act like I'm above it. I want that too. I want to see Tony, like David Chase said, smash the guy's head against the wall. But it's funny if you take a second to even just think about how uninteresting that would be, like, to have it on the show. And then it's like, where do you go? Because now it's like Melfi and Tony are both like in the mob together in a weird way, because she owes him now because he did a solid for her. And it would just lead it down such a different path to what we know the show is, at least at this point. I mean, I guess there's an argument to say maybe that would be the game changer where we get a different show, but I'm glad we're not there, at least yet.
Well, that's a very good point, because I've had the same thought about, for example, other shows. Let's not name any names. Handmaid's Tale. I'm talking about Handmaid's Tale, where you really want something to happen, but then you realize if that happened, the show wouldn't be as interesting anymore. Because, like you mentioned, it would be like the other shows would just have the cool moment, because why not? And then figure out what to do from there. And Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, actually said something really interesting along those lines, that if you follow what's cool and instead of following the character, that way lies monsters, because you can probably keep people fooled and yourself fooled for a while that it's a great story because cool shit's happening, but you won't go wrong if you follow the characters instead. So until next week. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just one quick caveat. I mean, I know this isn't about The Handmaid's Tale, but to argue against The Handmaid's Tale, they hold back maybe a bit too much. But hey, you'll hear more of that very shortly if you're listening live, or if you listen to our Handmaid's Tale podcast, the Gilead Gazette.
Yes, which we're actually coming up with right now live. But yes, until next week, please do check out the Gilead Gazette, and of course, jimandthem.com if you want to hear more about weird news stories. I did feel like we were heading into Jim and Them territory there when you started telling me about some weird violent news story, because I get all my information on that from jimandthem.com. There's also, of course, awesomepedia.org if you want to follow any of my creations, such as podcasts, music, video productions, and things like that. But apart from that, is there anything else, Jim?
One more thing. Cut to black.